Hey folks, have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you've been listening to the Whitfield Report for a while and you're starting to think to yourself, hey, you know what? I could do this podcast thing. But where the hell do I start? Well, folks, I've had a lot of friends ask me that in the last few weeks, and I'm here to tell you all that Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. This means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. You're damn right that's what I'm doing. And what I like about Anchor is that whether you're a novice or an expert, it's incredibly easy to use. They have great tools that you can use to record and edit your podcast if you're a novice just starting out. Or if you're like me and you're an old pro at this, you can bring your own tools and record your audio and then upload the files yourselves. Whichever way you podcast, it's extremely easy to use Anchor, and I highly recommend them. So get started today by going to anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Now go out there and make some podcasts. Greetings to you, savages. It's Wednesday, hump day, and I'm here a bit early to bring you a bonus episode of the Whitfield Report. Yeah, I'm checking on you a day early, kiddos. How you doing? It's Savage Sam here, the Whitfield Report Wednesday bonus edition. And this is one that you've requested for quite a long time. People have been begging me to do this podcast for a couple months now. Actually, probably longer than that. But ladies and gentlemen, it's inevitable that this podcast happens today. As many of you know, I've been in radio, or I guess podcasting, since I was 13. That's when I started this whole crazy journey into podcasting. And it's not quite my podcasting anniversary yet, but it is fitting that it's October now. By the way, happy October to you all in the Savage Express. But October is the anniversary month of when I interviewed Ben Shapiro on my old show, The Whitfield Report, back in 2012 when I was a senior in high school. So many of you since then have discovered me and found me, and some of you have heard that interview, gone back and found it. Others of you haven't found it yet. So I'm going to go ahead and actually post that for you so that you can hear that in this episode. Now, keep in mind a few things. And let me give you a little backstory, actually, as to how that all happened. Right? So, when I was in 8th grade, that was the 2008 election between Obama and McCain, and I was a political nerd, and that's when also the PC culture started coming into effect, and I was studying the election polls, and Obama's record seemed all over the place. So I just merely questioned Obama's legitimacy as a candidate. Got called a racist for just merely questioning it. So, me being the political junkie that I was even at age 14, I decided to, try my hand at this new thing called podcasting. And, I have to admit, my first episode, my very first podcast ever, my voice hadn't even cracked. I still sound like a kid. And it was basically like a Rush Limbaugh kind of ripoff, thing. I'm not going to lie. But, I started the podcast in 8th grade. Once I got into high school, some of my friends started listening to it and, loved it. So I continued to do more. Admittedly, a lot of my podcast episodes in high school were kind of cringe, admittedly, because, I was a teenager. And, teenagers don't know a lot about a lot of stuff, let alone, politics. And, so I admit that maybe I started a little young. But at the same time, maybe I didn't. And I'll explain that in a bit too. But when I was 16, that was when Andrew Breitbart launched the Breitbart websites, the original ones, Big Hollywood, Big Government, all that stuff. And I followed him, I followed the websites, I should say. 2011 was the year that I got my Twitter. And, Breitbart was one of the, first big conservatives that I followed on Twitter. And he was funny. He was, very cunning. He wasn't really a political guy. He seemed to be more like a guy who was into pop culture and whatnot, and then just got kind of dragged into the political war. In fact, his book, Righteous Indignation, kind of points to that fact, as well, ladies and gentlemen, that he really was a culture war, that he really was, more or less like a cultural guy who was into movies and music and got pulled into, politics. And that really spoke to me, at age 16 or whatever, because I felt the same way. So I really liked Andrew Breitbart, and that was when I discovered Dennis Miller, and that was a big turning point for me. But then, when I was 17, March of 2012, that was when Breitbart passed away. It was a huge blow to me. I mean, I never met Andrew, but his work was just so very influential. And I remember listening to Breitbart's CPAC speech, where he talked about, conservative unity, how we couldn't, keep being the GOP of old. We had to become, citizen journalists and take up, online, blogging and social media. We had to become fearless. Otherwise, we were going to lose. And, if you don't support the candidate, you're on the other side. That's the standout line I remember. And I remember being 17 and, that really, that spoke to me. His CPAC speech did. I feel like he was directly talking to me. And then a month later, he passed. And, when I was, before then, I had just been doing the show, kind of as a hobby. I enjoyed it. It was a good way for me to express myself. But, after Breitbart's passing, and, watching his speeches and getting my hands on everything that I could of Andrew Breitbart's, I knew that, this was my life's passion. And so I wanted to pay tribute to Breitbart. And, obviously I couldn't talk to him because he had passed. And I was going to try, to reach out to the other dimension, that wouldn't have worked out, I don't think. And that's a joke, ladies and gentlemen. But no, in all seriousness, I I I wanted to talk to people who knew Breitbart, and so um, I had I had seen Ben Shapiro writing for Breitbart. He was kind of, I always like to say that Ben Shapiro back in the day was Robin to Andrew's Batman, essentially. Um, and Ben Shapiro was kind of an up and coming young conservative at the time. And keep in mind, this is pre Daily Wire. This is, like he was still, I think he had just become like editor at that point, and then Breitbart passed. So I reached out to, Ben. I sent him an email. And also at this point, he had just debated Pierce Morgan on gun control in the immediate aftermath of Sandhook. So like he was already starting to become like a bit of a name in the conservative movement, but he wasn't as big as he is now, if that makes sense. And I just took a chance and reached out to him and emailed him. I can't remember if I have the original email, but I think the email I wrote was something along the lines of, hello, Mr. Shapiro. My name is Sam Whitfield. I'm a senior in high school and I have this podcast. I was a big fan of Andrew. He really inspired me. I'd like to have you on the show because I know that obviously you guys just lost him, but I'd like to pay tribute to him. And would you mind maybe coming on my show and sharing some stories about Andrew? Thank you very much for your time. And I left my contact info. Wasn't expecting to hear back, but then from what I remember, I think I got an email either the same day that I sent it or like a day after. And to my surprise, he was like saying, sure, where's your show at? What time? How do I call in? All that. So at the time, I was on Blog Talk Radio, which I think Andrew Breitbart might have actually had a Blog Talk Radio show at the time. And so Ben called in, and we did the show, and I was super, super nervous, as you're going to hear. Like I was just like, I think I did pretty well considering it was like my first big interview, but still, I was kind of, looking back, I was essentially kind of shitting a brick because, like, true that Ben wasn't as big as he was, but like he was still kind of becoming Ben Shapiro. He was still kind of a big deal, and here I was, just a high school kid in the, in the in the middle of Colorado. In October it was getting cold, and I was just some kid doing my show out of my, parents' basement, literally. And so, we did the show, and I think, in hindsight, it turned out real well. And I want you guys to hear this. Now, one other note I have to make is Blog Talk Radio back in the day. For those of you who don't know how Blog Talk Radio worked, basically, it was a glorified, like, conference calling system to where, like, hosts would call in on their cell phones, and then you would dial in, and it would connect you to like a control panel that you would like access on your computer, and then you would broadcast through that. But the reason I bring that up is, the audio quality basically, and then like your guests would conference in. The reason why I bring that up is the audio quality basically sounds like a conference call. It was 2012. That was the best we had back in the day, but it's still compared to this podcast and compared to what we have now in 2019, right now we're kind of living in a golden age of podcasting. But, back in the day, no one, the only people who knew what podcasts were really the hobbyists, like myself, and like some of the early Adam Carolla fans and the early Joe Rogan fans. But, other than that, most people didn't know what podcasting was. And so it was very niche. And, so as a result, we didn't have great, it just wasn't a thing back then like it is now. And so, compared to today's standards, the audio quality is shit. But, I did try and clean up this interview a bit. So, I hope you will enjoy hearing a very young, me, a very young Sam, interviewing Ben Shapiro. And, I'll come back and afterwards and, I'll do some commentary afterwards. But yeah, without further ado, let's flash back to my old show, the Whitfield Analysis. And here's the interview with Ben Shapiro, folks. I hope you all enjoy it. And without further ado, let's take it away. So, first of all, sir, I'd like to ask you a little bit about yourself. How did you get started in the blogging industry, I guess?
Well, I started off when I was really young. I started off as a columnist for the UCLA Daily Bruin, and then got a syndicated column about a year later when I was 17 years old. So I was the youngest syndicated columnist in the country. It was about that time that I met Andrew, actually. Andrew saw my column in the UCLA Daily Bruin and was impressed that there was this is how Andrew was. He was impressed that there was somebody there who was conservative. And he emailed me out of the blue. He was the other half of Matt Drudge's website at that point. He had nothing to, he had not started his own enterprises at all. And he said, why don't we get together? And we ended up at like a taco shop in Westwood, which is typical Andrew. Over time, my career grew, his career grew. And by the time he hired me, we had been friends for, over a decade. And he said on Dennis Miller's show that it was the longest political flirtation in American history, because we'd been talking about working together for about a decade. So he hired me, and unfortunately 3 weeks later he dropped dead, which was obviously tragic for everybody. So it was through the grace of God that I was allowed the opportunity, number one, to know Andrew, but number two, to help out when he died, carrying forward his legacy.
Wow. Well, he was one of my heroes as well. I don't think I've ever seen anyone more passionate than him. What was he like as a person?
It's funny. Andrew described himself pretty well. He understood himself pretty well. He said that he basically had two modes. One was kind of sheer hilarity, and the other was complete and utter righteous indignation, which is, of course, the name of his book. And that was pretty much that's pretty accurate. That's who Andrew was. He was either extraordinarily upset with the political situation and fighting all the time, or he was jocular. I think he used the word jocularity a lot. So that's who Andrew was. He was hysterically funny. One of his favorite things to do with me was that I'm an Orthodox Jew and very socially conservative. Andrew was not socially conservative. He wasn't socially liberal. He wasn't really into social politics very much. But he was very, he used to like making dirty jokes in front of me, and then waiting for me to laugh, and then he'd kind of look at me and wait for me to laugh, and then he'd start laughing hysterically as soon as I gave him a little bit of a chuckle. So that was one of Andrew's favorite things. That's kind of who Andrew was. He was a prankster. He saw himself as a merry prankster. He was somebody who liked to have fun with it. In the last years of his life, obviously, as he became bigger and bigger, I think it was still fun for him, but it also became a much more serious game for him. He became much more serious about it. He always had a good time with it, but he saw kind of what was at stake in the country, and especially with the leftist reaction against the Tea Party, he became much more of the righteous indignation guy and the jocularity guy, had to take a backseat because we were living in serious times.
Yeah, definitely. Well, he will be missed. One question relating to his death that I do want to bring up real quick before we get into Benghazi, because I've been getting emails about this. There are some individuals out there who believe that he was assassinated.
No, it's not true. There's no evidence to that whatsoever. I knew Andrew longer than anybody at the company, with the exception of Larry Soloff, who knew him since he was 5 years old. There's no evidence to that effect whatsoever. Andrew had a congenital heart defect. He was adopted, so nobody knew that he had a congenital heart defect because nobody knew his parents. And so, you know, he just dropped dead. I mean, there was no alcohol involved, no drugs involved. It wasn't about his weight. It wasn't about anything except probably a certain amount of stress and this congenital heart defect. There's no evidence whatsoever that there was anything dirty afoot. I know in the days after he died, there's a lot of talk about that, and those of us who knew him well, we knew that it was nonsense right off the bat. But there were a lot of people obviously who were trying to make a big deal out of that or suggest that it was the case. There's again no evidence to suggest that, and in fact, there's evidence to the contrary. So.
All right, well, that's good to hear. I never believed it either myself. But anyway, one of the reasons why I brought you on here, other than that I'm a big fan of your work, is I saw your article that you wrote. You've been writing. You guys have been covering this whole issue with Benghazi a lot, and so I just want to ask you a couple questions. So my show is targeted primarily at the high school generation and the college generation. So my first question is, what do you think is going on with Benghazi? Why has the president been so incompetent with the situation, and why is this important to America?
Well, I mean, it should be important to every American when Americans get killed. But I mean, beyond that, this is a reflection of the president's cowardly foreign policy. He's somebody who had suggested everything was sort of hunky-dory in Libya and preferred to ignore the ramifications of what was going on in terms of the terrorist threat there, just like he's preferred to ignore the ramifications of the terrorist threat, particularly Islamic terrorism everywhere else. There are several issues to do with Benghazi that are incredibly disturbing. The first is, how is it even possible that we don't have Marines on the ground protecting our ambassador in Benghazi? We're not talking about having Marines on the ground to protect our ambassador in, say, France, where, by the way, we do have Marines that protect the ambassador. We're talking about freaking Benghazi. Okay, Benghazi is one of the most terrorist-laden places on earth. The entire city was controlled by a terrorist group called Ansar al-Sharia. It turns out that was the exact terrorist group that murdered the ambassador. We didn't have security there. That's question number one. Question number two is why the president then proceeded to blame a YouTube video for several months, right? I mean, for weeks and weeks and weeks, going on 2 months, he blamed a YouTube video for the assassination of our ambassador, which was insane. I mean, there was nothing to do with the YouTube video. So that begs the question of why did he lie about it? And the answer as to why he lied about it, it's turning out now, is because he had every ability to stop what was going on in the terrorist attack, apparently. Apparently we had drones in the air, in the area. We had gunships that were available to go to the site of the terrorist attack. We had agents available, and they were told to stand down eventually because they were heroes. They just ignored the order and went to save their comrades. But this is what the Obama administration is all about. They're cowards. And on foreign policy, they've been hiding behind the bin Laden kill for several years at this point. And the fact is this, the bin Laden kill was not a foreign policy, and any president, including Jimmy Carter, would have made the call to kill bin Laden. That was not even a close call. What is a closer call is, do you send support to save our ambassador? And President Obama stood there and did nothing. Apparently, I mean, there are now reports coming out that he was sitting there watching it live in the Situation Room at the White House as this whole thing was going down and didn't do a thing to help save our folks. So, I mean, it should be disturbing to every American when the President of the United States is not doing anything to protect our ambassadors, to protect U.S. staff. This has nothing to do with politics. This is impeachable stuff. And for him to suggest that people are just playing politics over the death of Americans, it's insipid. There's no there's no justification for him for that accusation. His righteous indignation during the debate was maybe the saddest display of political chicanery that I've seen in my lifetime.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it is impeachable stuff. What the whole thing just stinks. You know, I'm a senior in high school, and I've been in this talk radio thing. I've been involved politically for the last 4 years, doing a blog and a talk show, and I've never seen this much corruption from any political office. One of the things that completely baffles me, though, it doesn't shock me, but I think it is an issue that needs to be brought up. Why are we not hearing about this from the mainstream media?
Well,
do you think?
I mean, the answer is because, and this is one of Andrew's big kicks, but, you know, the mainstream media is, they're lackeys. They're lackeys for the Obama administration. On the Sunday shows this morning, I mean, our lead piece on the site was this, you know, written by Joel Pollack, who's our editor-in-chief, and Joel and I discussed it before he wrote it. The fact is that the Sunday shows this morning didn't even ask a single question about it. The only person who asked a question about it was Bob Schieffer, and it was a follow-up question to something that a Republican asked. So what we're watching here is the mainstream media trying to run out the clock in this election cycle. They think that if they just ignore Benghazi, ignore Libya, it won't have any effect on the election. They're wrong. Obama's going to lose, and one of the reasons he's going to lose is because he's a coward on foreign policy, and we're seeing it.
Do you think that, like, I don't want to go into conspiracy theories here, but I honestly think that the president is trying to hide something sinister here. Am I the only one that feels that way, or, I mean,
No, I mean, I think we have to wait and see what all the information is before we know exactly what it was he's trying to hide. There's no question he's trying to hide something. You know, at the beginning we thought maybe he was trying to hide the fact that there was a terrorist attack at all, and now it appears that he was trying to hide the fact that he could have stopped it and did nothing. And now there are, you know, other rumors out there about what exactly we were doing in Benghazi in the first place. There was a CIA office there. You know, there are questions as to what was happening there. So what we're watching right now is the unraveling of the Obama foreign policy, and Paul Ryan has said that, and so has Mitt Romney, and they're exactly correct. Obama's foreign policy is based on, I mean, it really is chewing gum and bailing wire, and they have no clue what they're doing. Or if they do have a clue what they're doing, it's even more nefarious than I'm suggesting right now. Because if they have a clue what they're doing and this is how they act, then there is no justification for this administration.
No, there certainly is not. Well, Mr. Shapiro, I certainly thank you for your time, and I'd like to talk to you more in private, maybe about helping out with Breitbart and some of that stuff. But in the meantime, thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on. And where can we find you other than Breitbart?
You can follow me on Twitter at Ben Shapiro. That's the easiest way to see all my stuff. I also write a syndicated column for Town Hall, and if you want to listen to me on the radio, you can tune in every weekday, 6 to 9 a.m., KRLA 870, which is one of the stations in Los Angeles, so KRLA870.com.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so that is the famed, or I guess infamous, Ben Shapiro interview that launched my, that was kind of the interview that, and I didn't plan it this way, but that's kind of the interview that, broke me in and that I made my bones with in the political, world. After that was when Jason Veely found me shortly thereafter. I think Caden Cowger, who we had, we had both met kind of around that time. He found me, and then Jason found me, and, Caden was doing his thing, and Jason was starting Junior Factor Nation at the time, and he wanted me to come on and join his network. And so we did, and Jason had already been doing local access television, I think, in Connecticut, where he's from. But then with Junior Factor Nation, obviously, that was 2012. And by that time, like, internet radio was becoming a little bit better, but it still wasn't what it is today. But we did pretty good, I think, back in the day. And, then we ran strong when we separated. I can't even remember, like, why we broke the group up. I think, honestly, I think it was an ego clash, which I will admit partial responsibility. I think we just had way too many creative differences at the time. And, I remember there was a little bit of fighting on the way out the door, but not that much. Then I started NGC Media with Matt. Then that kind of, fumed out. But, and then I went to write for that Never Trump blog in 2015, and, then I did my own thing after that, and here we are. So that's kind of a summation of my like history. I know I'm missing some gaps. I mean, I've been doing this podcast thing for so long now that sometimes events in my timeline, in my own timeline, get jumbled down. Which maybe people are right. Maybe I finally do need to write my memoir. But in all seriousness, though, um, you know, Jason obviously came on the live stream the other night with his brother, and it was great talking to them again. And you know, Jason and Tate, if you guys are listening to this, you said that I've helped you out. Well, you guys helped me out way back when, back in the day. You guys were letting me get started, and and also I guess thank you, Ben Shapiro, for helping me get started. I mean, I know that the other thing is Ben Shapiro and I have not been in contact for a long time. I don't. He probably doesn't remember. He probably wouldn't remember me from Adam now, but like back in the day, that interview helped me blow up, and I am I'm thankful that I interviewed Shapiro, and I'm thankful also for Andrew Breitbart and his influence, and Rush Limbaugh, and all the influences that I had at like an early age. And granted, I'm not so much into politics. Well, I shouldn't say I'm not into politics, but I'm not as much a strictly political guy now as I was. I've kind of become more like a pop culture guy, now, in addition to politics. And I mean, it's just I don't even know how to fully explain. Thinking back, to when I was 17, maybe I wasn't cut out to do politics back then. Looking back, maybe I wasn't. There were a lot of things I made mistakes on, from like ages 14 when I started to, 18. I wasn't perfect, granted, and, I admit that. I'm still not perfect. But at the same time, in my personal life, podcasting has given me a way to really express myself, not only in terms of politics, but now also, pop culture, and just kind of doing, I guess, monologues like this, which I've kind of taken from Bill Burr a bit. And, Dennis Miller, now, he doesn't have his radio show anymore, but he now has a podcast. And, Dennis Miller, a few weeks ago, when he, on his podcast, The Dennis Miller Option, he said that podcasting is almost kind of like a therapeutic thing for him, because he can just, talk out like whatever is on his mind. And I think Bill Burr treats, his podcast, the Monday Morning Rant, the same way. And, that's what this podcast has kind of become. It's kind of become my silly jumble of, politics, pop culture, music, and just, me being me. And I'm so grateful to, just have this audience that supports me and, loves the podcast and, is helping me grow. And like that's the other thing is even though I've been at this for a while, like I still feel like I'm new at this, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, I've had to reinvent my brand a few times, right? But like I feel like what I have now with the Whitfield report. And by the way, I fucked up on the intro, and I said that the Ben Shapiro was from the Whitfield report, but I'd like to correct my first show was called the Whitfield Analysis. That was what I had on Blog Talk Radio. It was called the Whitfield Analysis, and then I brought the Whitfield Analysis brand to JFN. After JFN broke up, I brought that to NGC. And then after NGC kind of, fell apart as a group, I scrapped it, started the Whitfield Report. And, I've been doing the Whitfield Report for 4 years now. So, I've started over fresh. Obviously, I'm a lot older. So the Whitfield Analysis is really, my teen years, which, is fun, but, like, I don't really count them all that much anymore. The Whitfield Report is, me now in my current incarnation, and I'm loving it. I'm loving it. And you guys are just awesome, each and every one of you who listens and supports. And I know many of you through several discords and just the interaction on the podcast feed and on my YouTube channel is excellent. So I don't want to make like a big speech here, but just I guess, guys, thank you so very much for your continued support of the show. And, I'm honored for those of you who have reached out and, gotten to know me. I'm honored to know you guys. And, to those of you who are starting, a podcast, just keep it up, whether you're doing politics or pop culture or a music podcast or whatever. If you really are dedicated to podcasting and you have a burning desire, you will make it in this business if you're passionate about podcasting like I am. And I guess like that's the ultimate thing is even looking back as like a teenager, it wasn't even so much the politics for me that I was into. I just, I've always loved podcasting ever since I was a teenager because it was like an art form that just spoke to me. And, it just so happened that because I was good at like politics and current events in school, that was kind of what I gravitated to initially, and I became a politico. And then, in recent years, I've kind of stepped back a little bit, mainly because, like I haven't really fit in anywhere, like in one particular conservative group. I'm not conservative, establishment or the clinical conservatives. I'm not a neocon. But, I'm not like on the alt-right either. So, I'm just doing like my own thing. I'm a savage. I'm a savage Sam. So, anyway, just, yeah, folks, I just can't believe I played that interview again. It's been a long time since I've heard it, and I'm just amazed at how much I've grown, as a podcaster, and I'm humbled, honestly. by all of you who support me every day and who just continue to support the podcast. So, to each and every one of you listening out there, thank you so much. God bless you all. I will be back tomorrow to do a political show. I'll follow up a bit on some of this impeachment stuff. Or will it be an impeachment stuff? We still don't know at this point. Politics is a little fucked up right now. But when isn't it fucked up? So anyway, folks, with all that in mind, I'm signing off. It's Wednesday. I hope your hump day is going good. I hope if it is hump day, you're going to do what I do after this podcast and grab yourself a nice, cold, frosty brew. And, maybe go hang out with some friends. Or if you're like me, you're going to hang out and, watch a little TV tonight or something. And, maybe do some tweeting or something. I don't know. You do you. Just don't do anything illegal. We don't condone that here. But, anyway, folks, I'll be back tomorrow. And from all of us here at NGC Studios, good night. God bless. God save this great nation. God, freedom, democracy in that order. And I'll see you tomorrow for the regular Thursday podcast. And, of course, we've got the Saturday live stream coming up. Still making plans for that. But we'll get to that when we, get to it. So anyway, folks, good night and God bless. I'll see you on tomorrow's main episode of the Whitfield Report.